The cavern groaned with a deep guttural rumble, as if the stone walls had heartbeats of their own. Heat radiated in waves from the lake of molten lava beneath the rickety bridge, each surge of warmth prickling Jacob's skin and making his eyes sting. The air shimmered with a suffocating intensity, thick and heavy, like the blanket his mother used to drape over him when he was sick. But this was no comforting quilt. It was a stifling, invisible shroud of despair. He stood at the beginning of the bridge, clutching the frayed wooden railing with fingers so small and pale that his knuckles gleamed white. His knees wobbled beneath him, and sweat dripped down his neck, mixing with the grime and dust from the stone tunnel that had sealed shut behind him. He had tried clawing at the collapsed rocks, scraping his hands raw until the skin bled, but it was no use. There was no way back. The way forward was his only choice. He looked down at himself, trembling in his worn, blue footy pajamas. The fabric was smudged with dirt, and one of the knees had a tear, exposing his scraped, raw skin beneath. They had once been his favorite, with little stars and moons stitched into the soft cotton. But here, in this cavern of heat and terror, they only made him feel more like the frightened little boy he was. The bridge stretched on endlessly, or so it seemed to Jacob. Planks of rotted wood were loosely anchored with rusted iron chains and connected with frayed ropes, which groaned and swayed with even the smallest gust of heat. Some of the boards were missing, and others looked like they could splinter and shatter under the weight of a breath. He would have to step carefully, or he'd fall. And beneath him, the lava bubbled hungrily, licking at the air with tongues of flame. Jacob swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Mama!" he called out, his voice cracking. It was swallowed by the cavern, echoing once before fading into the hiss and crackle of the lava below. There was no answer, no comfort, just the bridge, the fire, and the heavy, unrelenting heat. He took a step forward. The wood groaned in protest, and he froze, heart thumping so hard he could feel it in his temples. Fear was a living thing, coiling in his stomach, whispering that he was too small, too weak, too afraid. But he forced himself to breathe, to whisper a prayer his mother had taught him, even though his voice shook. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." His lips quivered. He tried to remember the rest, but the words slipped away like sand through his fingers. He was just a boy, a little boy, alone on a bridge suspended over hell itself. Another step. The plank shuddered beneath his weight, but it held. One more step, then another. The bridge swayed, and Jacob gritted his teeth, eyes fixed ahead. He didn't dare look down. He couldn't afford to. The cavern sighed, and a gust of heat washed over him, searing his skin. And just as Jacob steadied himself, something in the air shifted, a low, whispering sound he couldn't quite catch. The cavern held its breath, and so did he. Something was waiting for him, something dark, and Jacob knew he wasn't truly alone. Jacob took another step forward, his small hands trembling on the railing as the bridge swayed beneath him. The wood creaked ominously, and his breath hitched in his throat. He tightened his grip, his knuckles throbbing with pain. The air was stifling, the heat relentless, and he could feel the sweat soaking through his footy pajamas, sticking the fabric to his skin. "Jacob," The voice drifted through the cavern, a soft, oily whisper that seemed to curl around his ears like smoke. Jacob's heart leapt, and he whipped his head around, searching for the source, but there was no one there. Just shadows and firelight dancing on the jagged walls. He shivered despite the heat, a cold feeling prickling the back of his neck. Who's there? He stammered, his voice coming out small and scared, just like he felt. Oh, Jacob, don't be afraid, the voice cooed, sweet as honey, but carrying an undercurrent that made his stomach clench. I'm a friend, a guide, someone to help you. Jacob's eyes darted around the cavern, but he still saw no one. He clutched the railing tighter, feeling the splinters digging into his palms. His mother had warned him about voices like this, about the kind of deceivers that preyed on the lost and desperate. But he was so alone, and the bridge felt so impossibly long. You don't look like you believe me, the voice said, almost amused. But I can see you're scared. So very scared. This is no place for a good boy like you. Where are you? Jacob demanded, his voice quivering. Show yourself! The air shimmered, and from the shadows at the edge of the bridge, a figure emerged. It seemed to step right out of the darkness, tall and thin, with limbs that were just a little too long, a grin that was far too wide. The demon's skin was the color of old ash, and horns curled from its head like twisted tree roots. But its eyes were the color of dying embers, and they burned with a mocking light. The creature spread its arms wide, as if welcoming Jacob into the embrace. There now, see? Nothing to fear. It tilted its head, that too wide grin stretching. My name is Ashkelon, and you, dear boy, look terribly lost. Jacob shrank back. He felt so small, so young, his heart hammering in his chest. I don't need any help, he whispered, trying to sound braver than he felt. I just need to get across. Ashkelon's grin softened, almost pitying. Of course, he murmured, his voice soothing and silky. But why cross alone when you could have a friend? Someone who understands how hard it is to be good, how exhausting it is to keep walking when you just want to rest. Jacob's hands trembled, and he shook his head. No, he whispered. I have to keep going. Ashkelon's eyes narrowed, though his smile never wavered. Why? He asked, leaning in. What's the point? It's so much easier to give up, to let go, to fall. His voice grew softer, almost hypnotic. You're just a little boy, Jacob. It's too much for you. Jacob squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the words, but they pressed into his mind, seeping into the cracks like poison. He was just a little boy. Maybe it was too much. Maybe... No, he whispered again, forcing the thought away, clinging to his mother's prayers, to the memory of her voice. I have to keep going. Ashkelon's grin twisted into a sneer, and the air seemed to shiver with dark amusement.
"We'll see about that,"
the demon murmured, stepping back into the shadows, his presence lingering like a sickness. Jacob opened his eyes, feeling the burn of tears threatening to spill. He took another shaky breath, another step forward. The bridge groaned, but he kept moving, his heart pounding. The path was long, and the shadows watched him, waiting for him to stumble, but he couldn't stop. Not yet. The heat was relentless, pressing down on Jacob like a suffocating blanket. It seeped into every fiber of his being, making his skin feel raw and blistered beneath the sticky fabric of his footy pajamas. His breath came in short, ragged gasps, and his vision wavered, like the air itself was bending from the sweltering inferno beneath him. One step at a time. That's what he kept telling himself. One step at a time. But every inch forward seemed to make the bridge creak louder, groan deeper, ready to splinter and let him plunge into the sea of molten rock below. Jacob tried not to look down, but he couldn't help it. The lava shifted and boiled, sending up waves of shimmering heat that made his head spin.
Poor Jacob,"
came Ashkelon's mocking voice, slithering around the heat like a snake. The demon's presence returned, hovering close, even though Jacob couldn't see him.
"You must be so thirsty, so tired. Why not just rest?"
Jacob licked his dry, cracked lips, his throat burning for water. His muscles ached, and his small feet in their soft, worn pajamas were blistering and raw from the bridge's rough planks. It was almost too much to bear.
"I can't,"
Jacob croaked out, his voice breaking.
"I have to keep going."
The demon's laughter echoed through the cavern, a hollow, joyless sound.
"Why?"
Ashkelon sneered.
"To prove what? To be good?"
The last word came out drenched in contempt.
"Goodness is overrated, Jacob. A heavy burden for such small shoulders."
Jacob winced, a surge of doubt crawling through his chest. Was he too small? Too weak? The bridge seemed to stretch on forever, and his legs trembled under the weight of his fear. Ashkelon's words dug into his mind, whispering of rest, of surrender, of failure. The heat grew more oppressive. Waves of scorching air rolled up from below. Sweat trickled down Jacob's face, stinging his eyes, making him stumble. He bit his lip, a little sob escaping as he fought to keep his balance. The world spun. The cavern, an endless tunnel of fire and torment. Ashkelon materialized behind him, walking with a strange grace over the swaying planks. The demon's ember eyes gleamed with cruel delight, and he leaned close, his voice a sickly sweet whisper.
"Let me help you, Jacob. Just take my hand. I can make the pain go away."
Jacob flinched back, nearly losing his footing. He clung to the railing, his palms slick with sweat and fear.
"Stay away,"
he whispered, the words barely audible over the rush of the lava and the pounding of his heart. Ashkelon smiled, but it was a predator's smile, full of sharp teeth and darker promises.
"You think you're strong enough to resist me?"
he taunted.
"You think your faith, your goodness, will carry you across this bridge?
The demon's voice turned mocking, his eyes narrowing.
Goodness is weakness, Jacob. Strengthness lies in letting go, in embracing your desires.
Jacob's vision blurred from the heat and the tears he refused to let fall. He clenched his teeth, his body trembling with exhaustion and terror. He wanted to scream, to cry, to beg for help, but he knew there was no one else here. Only the bridge, the fire, and the voice that tried to break him. The planks creaked beneath him, and he took another step forward, his small, sweating feet dragging. The cavern felt like it was swallowing him whole, the heat licking at his skin, but he pressed on. His mother's prayers whispering through his mind, faint echoes of hope in this furnace of despair. He had to keep going. He had to get to his mommy. The bridge groaned under his weight, and Ashkelon's laughter rippled through the heat, cruel and patient. The demon wasn't done with him yet, and Jacob knew, deep down, that the hardest trial was still to come. The bridge continued to groan under Jacob's small weight as he continued forward, clutching the railing as if his life depended on it. The wooden planks, scorched and warped from the heat below, seemed to whisper with every cautious step he took. Sweat streamed down his face, and his footy pajamas clung to his small frame, soaked and heavy. His heart raced with a thumping beat that felt like a drum roll announcing his fear. The demon's voice came again, softer this time, as though trying to be gentle.
Poor, poor Jacob,
It crooned.
Look at you, struggling and frightened. So much effort just to be good. Isn't it exhausting?
Jacob's lips pressed together, and he didn't respond. He kept his focus on the next step, and then the next, gripping the railing so hard his knuckles turned white.
Think about it,
The demon continued, slithering through the air around him. It had no form, just a shifting, shadowy presence.
all the times you've tried so hard to do the right thing. Did it ever matter? Did anyone care when you shared your toys with the neighbor boy? Or when you told the truth even when it hurt?
The voice dripped with mock sympathy.
It only brought you trouble, didn't it?
Jacob faltered. The mention of telling the truth struck a chord, and he remembered that time he confessed to breaking his father's favorite mug. He'd been scolded, sent to bed without supper, even though he'd been honest. His heart felt heavy, but he shook his head.
It's still the right thing to do,
he whispered, mostly to himself.
Oh, Jacob,
The demon sighed.
so noble, even when it's pointless. Let me paint you a different picture. One where you don't have to be so tired.
The shadows near the bridge quivered, and the heat from the lava below seemed to pulse with newfound intensity.
Imagine this. If you embrace the darkness, no more expectations. No more being told to sit up straight or clean your room. You could do whatever you want. Take what you desire.
The demon's voice twisted, syrupy and tempting.
You'd never be small and powerless again.
Jacob's tiny fingers trembling on the railing. The thought of never having to be afraid or weak gnawed at his resolve. The words were like honey, coating the parts of his mind where doubt and exhaustion lingered.
Everyone is against you, Jacob. Even your parents punish you when you try your best. Why do you have to follow their rules?
The demon's voice shifted, almost sweet now.
It's not fair, is it?
Jacob's eyes burned, not just from the heat, but from the unshed tears.
It's not true,
he choked out, even though the demon's words had clawed at his deepest insecurities. The demon chuckled, the sound hollow and echoing.
Isn't it? They don't love you unless you're perfect. One mistake, and you're not their precious little boy anymore.
It was like a poison that seeped through the air, attempting to warp Jacob's fragile hope. Jacob bit his lip, his resolve weakening, but deep down, past the exhaustion and tears, something still flickered. A small, stubborn flame that refused to be snuffed out. Jacob's knees wobbled, but he took another shaky step forward, the bridge swaying beneath his weight, the heat pressing in from all sides, suffocating as his vision blurred from the sweat, stinging and pouring into his eyes. The demon's cruel words gnawed at him, threatening to unravel every scrap of courage he had left. But somewhere in the fear of fog and exhaustion, he found a small, glowing memory. The warmth of his mother's smile when he had helped set the table for dinner. The way his father had ruffled his hair and called him a good lad when Jacob had offered to fetch his toolbox. Even the time he had shared his favorite toy truck with his little sister, despite wanting to play with it himself. The joy he'd felt then was real, pure and untainted. Jacob swallowed hard, clutching onto that feeling.
You're wrong,
he said, his small voice wavering but determined.
Being good, it matters.
His lips quivered as he tried to steady himself.
When I help, when I'm kind, it makes me happy.
The demon's shadows bristled, swirling in agitation.
Happiness,
it sneered, its voice suddenly dripping with venom.
Happiness is fleeting, boy. It fades the moment someone turns against you. And they always do.
Its form rippled, the shadows expanding.
You're just a pawn, Jacob. A tool. The world will chew you up and spit you out, no matter how hard you try to please it.
Jacob shook his head, his grip on the bridge's railing tightening.
No,
he whispered, more to himself than to the demon.
My mom and dad, they love me, even when I mess up.
Tears finally spilling down his cheeks, but he held on to that truth, clutching it like a lifeline.
And I want to make them proud, even if it's hard.
The shadows recoiled slightly, as if stung, and the demon's form began to twist, becoming more monstrous. Its eyes, two glowing embers in the darkness, burned with rage.
You insolent little wretch!
It roared. The ground beneath Jacob's feet trembled.
You dare defy me? After everything I've offered?
Jacob backed away, his heart hammering in his chest. The demon was no longer pretending to be kind or persuasive. Its patience had run out. The shadowy mass loomed higher, as if ready to swallow him whole. Its laughter, dark and guttural, echoed through the cavern. The bridge shuddered, and Jacob's world began to spin. He clutched his head, overwhelmed by the heat and fear, and let out a terrified scream.
Mom! Mom!
The next moment, everything shattered. The bridge, the cavern, the suffocating heat, all of it splintered into darkness. Jacob's body jerked upright, and he woke up, drenched in sweat, tangled in his bedsheets, his heart racing. "Mom!" He screamed again, his voice cracking. The door to his room burst open, and his mother rushed in, her face full of concern. "Jacob, honey, I'm here." She hurried to his side, pulling him into a tight embrace. Jacob sobbed into her shoulder, his tiny body trembling. The room was cool and safe, the soft glow of the nightlight casting gentle shadows instead of menacing ones. He clung to his mother, the remnants of the nightmare still clinging to his mind like smoke. Jacob's sobs began to quiet as his mother held him close, gently rocking him back and forth. The familiar scent of her lavender perfume was a soothing balm, grounding him in the safety of his room. The shadows that had once loomed so large now seemed to shrink, mere whispers of the terror he'd just escaped. His mother pulled back slightly to look at him, her warm brown eyes filled with concern. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing his damp hair away from his forehead. "It was just a bad dream. You're safe now." Jacob sniffled, wiping his tear-streaked face with the back of his hand.
It felt so real, Mama,"
he murmured, his voice still shaking.
"There was a monster, and it tried to make me do bad things."
His mother's face softened, and she cupped his cheek in her hand. "Monsters are tricky like that," she said gently. "They like to make us feel scared and alone. But you are never truly alone, Jacob. You remember what we always talked about, right? That your faith can give you strength, even when things seem dark and scary." Jacob nodded slowly, the tightness in his chest beginning to ease. His mother always knew what to say to make the fear fade. "How about this?" she continued with a small, comforting smile. "Why don't I make you some of your favorite orange juice, and we'll run a warm bath to wash all those bad dreams away." Jacob's lips trembled, but a hint of a smile broke through.
"With the bubbles?"
he asked, his voice still small. "With lots of bubbles," she promised, her smile widening. "And maybe I can read you your favorite storybook afterward." Jacob nodded again, feeling a flicker of hope chase away the lingering shadows. His mother stood up, gently helping him out of bed. He clung to her hand, his footy pajamas still damp with sweat, but he felt a sense of relief now, a warmth that had nothing to do with the oppressive heat of his nightmare. As they made their way to the kitchen, his mother paused and knelt down to look him in the eye. "And Jacob," she said softly, "no matter what monsters you face, I'll always be here for you. You're brave and you're strong, and the love we share, along with your faith, will always guide you." Jacob's eyes welled up again, but this time with gratitude. He threw his arms around her, hugging her tight.
"Thank you, Mama,"
he whispered. She kissed the top of his head. "Anytime, my sweet boy. Now, let's chase those shadows away once and for all." The two of them made their way to the kitchen, the nightmare already fading into the background. In the warmth of his mother's love, and with the promise of bubbles and a favorite story, Jacob knew he could face anything. even the scariest of monsters. In the darkest moments, the light of love and faith can be a shield against the shadows. When we hold on to hope and the people who care for us, we find the strength to face any evil, real or imagined. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. This story was more based on reality because this was actually the fever dream I had when I was breaking my fever when I was a little boy. The only thing that was added that was not part of the original dream was the demon. That's where I used the AI to add the demon to the story, just to give it a little bit more oomph and a little bit of the moral value between good and evil. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That is the lifeblood of my channel, and it really means a lot to us creators. And I'm also on Rumble, so I'm on YouTube and Rumble. And please share my stories with your friends. I really do enjoy sharing my stories with people. And I have my Buy Me a Coffee link. If you'd like to contribute to my creative journey, I would truly appreciate it. And as always, it's okay to be scary. I am too. Embrace the strange, embrace creativity, and I'll see you next time.